So yeah, the second session of the day, we've got another excellent guest. We have Maggie Carver, who's the Interim Chair of Ofcom, and she's going to be interviewed or in discussion with, after her speech, Stuart Purvis, who of course was Chief Executive of ITN for many years, an extremely experienced journalist and academic. I also learned in preparation for this that he's a non-executive director of Brentford Football Club. So I'm sure he'll be overall a pretty cheerful chap this season. So over to you, Stuart, to introduce Maggie. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Colin. And good morning, Maggie, to you too.
Good morning, Stuart. Nice to see you again.
Absolutely, to see you too. Now, next month, it will have been a year since Maggie was appointed by the government as the interim chair of Ofcom following the departure of Lord Burns at the end of his term. Now, at that point, Maggie was the deputy chair, so she is now the interim chair. But of course, as we all know, the process to appoint a permanent chair has not exactly been completed. Maggie, we're going to use the same format as was done with Richard Sharp. You're going to speak to us. I'm going to ask you a few questions. And then I'm going to pass on the audience's questions. And to repeat, please, audience, put your questions in the Q&A box, and I will read them out to our guest. You will not appear yourself when the questions are asked. So I think probably best thing to hand over to you, Maggie, at this point.
Thank you very much, Stuart, and good morning to everybody. I'm thrilled to have the chance to address the VLV, even virtually, of course. It would have been better to have seen you in person, but as we seek an ending to the pandemic, I feel enormously privileged to speak to you all for the first time. And as Stuart mentioned, being the interim chair, of course, it might well be the last. There's no doubt that the last 2 years have been tough. Many people have wrestled with the effects of coronavirus. Many have lost loved ones, and others have struggled to maintain their livelihoods. For the broadcasting industry that we care so much about, productions, advertising, and incomes have all been disrupted. But for all this, the enduring strength of our TV and radio sectors has shone through. Public service broadcasting has emerged strong, perhaps in some ways even stronger than before. During lockdown, many people found more time for specialist programs about history, science, and the arts, programs that provide perspective and sanctuary from the demands of daily life. As a musician, I was especially encouraged to see Radio 3 achieve its highest audience share for years. The value of our PSBs is hard to quantify, but I'll have a go. Together, they offer around 30,000 hours of new UK content every year, from drama and arts to entertainment and children's TV. To put that in context, that is over 100 times more than commercial streaming services. And of all the genre, we know that trusted, accurate news remains by far the single most important feature of PSB for viewers and listeners. People want strong and robust journalism that cuts through different viewpoints, provides clarity, and informs them about the world. And in an age of disruption, volatility, misinformation, and anxiety, this has never mattered more. News is a particular passion of mine. I see it as fundamentally important to our society and to our democracy. And I was really proud to chair ITN. I believe that the commercial PSBs, alongside the BBC and Sky News, are hugely important in providing a rich variety of high quality news and current affairs programmes. Let's not underestimate the power of that integrity and expertise. All of our PSBs maintain strict journalistic standards, checking their facts and sources. That is what enables the public to trust their news. So often today we hear about mistrust in companies, institutions and individuals. Much of that is fueled by social media. This year, we found that barely a third of people who use social media trust it for news. In the first week of lockdown alone, social media served up false information about coronavirus to almost half of online adults. But now compare TV news, where trust has actually risen over the recent years. During the pandemic, our news institutions led the fight against misinformation. Early on, as people looked for reliable, impartial information, our PSBs achieved their highest audience share in more than 6 years. More than 8 in 10 people rated them as trusted sources. Now, we can't take for granted that engagement. Viewers and listeners gain greater choice with every passing day. Our research last year also showed that lockdown speeded up the shift to streaming services. People spent twice as long on services like Netflix and Disney+. Children, already spending an hour of their day on YouTube, added services like TikTok to their media lives. So we can't doubt that tomorrow's adults will watch less TV than the generation before. And we can't assume that they will place as much value on PSB news as we do today. Ofcom is now thinking as widely as possible about the commercial future for PSBs. What support can regulators provide to ensure audiences keep the things that they value? As one example, take the terms under which broadcasters provide news to online platforms. Are the revenues here sufficient to support their businesses? Complex issues like these need a joined-up approach. So we're working alongside the CMA as part of a new forum with other digital regulators, and that's chaired by Melanie Dawes, our Chief Executive. We will examine all these questions alongside our fellow experts. But will we get the answers right? I think that's an important question, because trust in media is only one side of the story. People also need to have trust in the regulator. And that's where I and my fellow board members have a big role to play in supporting our senior management. So I thought it might help to say a bit more about that job. First, I think there's a general risk people expect and therefore worry that Ofcom might get dragged into culture wars or taking subjective political positions, whether we're regulating the BBC or ruling on complex broadcasting cases, such as Piers Morgan's comments about Meghan Markle. In fact, we hold our independence and our impartiality dear. Our executives make every decision on the evidence, without personal, political, or commercial influence. We expect to be accountable, not just to Parliament and courts of law, but also to the British people. We should be judged on our effectiveness as a regulator, because our work can affect everybody, from the viewer, listener, or broadband user at home, to the small business owner or investor. It's vital that people can trust Ofcom to make calm, clear-headed judgments, and that's why we operate under codes and clear laws and apply these to all our work at every level, from junior policy staff through to senior management and the board itself. Much of that work might not always attract attention, such as tackling violent hate speech on less talked about TV channels, or managing the airwaves for international broadcasters at COP26. But if it relates to big popular shows like Good Morning Britain or Love Island, which can generate thousands of complaints, then of course it leads to headlines. Every one of those complaints needs to be properly assessed, and not by the board. In fact, the board doesn't get involved in broadcasting standards decisions. It hasn't done so in my time on the board, nor that of my predecessor. Instead, these are made by an expert specialist team within Ofcom who have decades of combined experience in applying the broadcasting code and taking account of the relevant laws, such as people's rights to freedom of expression. The board does something different. We provide independent, objective challenge across Ofcom's work, and we shape and agree the organisation's strategy. We make sure Ofcom is governed in the right way, approve the budget and work plan, and support the executive by reviewing major policy areas. Collectively, our non-executive directors have decades of experience in very senior positions in the commercial sectors we regulate. And overall, the board brings experience from across the private and public sectors, from media to telecoms, charities to the city. I hope that that experience helps us to look across the economy and society and to anticipate change. Sometimes regulators get accused of spending too much time looking in the rearview mirror, of stepping in after the event when things are already moving on. But in a sector as fast-moving as communications, we cannot afford to spend too much time looking back. So a lot of my focus, and that of the board and the executive, has been on ensuring Ofcom keeps its eyes on the road ahead. Take public service broadcasting, which is the unrivaled passion of the VLV. To keep our PSBs relevant and visible to future generations, to ensure that they remain at the heart of our cultural landscape, we can't miss a beat. We must understand people's changing needs and attitudes to the media around them, which is why we never stop asking them what they think. We need to keep pace with unprecedented change, understanding the positive impact of new services, but also how they might affect the future business case for the content people love. And we must look to the future, anticipating how emerging technology might change things again. Our technology team at Ofcom is doing just that. They're led by Sachin Jogia, a leading technologist who also knows a thing or two about smart speakers. He joined us from Amazon, where he oversaw voice-activated services, an important growth area in radio and television. Similarly, our strategy and research teams are examining questions such as the future of TV and online advertising and what lasting impact the pandemic might have on production and commissioning. When it comes to the BBC, we need to keep our rules effective, which means understanding how people are choosing to access programmes, not just on traditional stations, but online as well. As you know, we're planning to update the BBC's operating licence to reflect that. If we don't change this approach, the value of the BBC content risks being tied up in services that no longer reach everybody. In particular, that value will no longer be protected for younger people, without whose time and money the BBC couldn't exist. That's why we're proposing new roles that focus on how the BBC provides for viewers and listeners, using measures like quality, reach, and impact for its programmes. But as we've made clear, we still need quotas. We want to secure certain types of programmes that people really value, to keep the BBC distinctive, and to make sure it continues to serve people who rely on traditional broadcast TV and radio. Finally, at the same time as looking ahead, we cannot neglect the present. And as we seek to sustain PSB for the next generation, we must not fail those who have already enjoyed and supported PSB for a generation or more. Because if one thing is true of PSB, it is that everybody matters. During Small Screen Big Debate, we heard about the importance of universal access to public service broadcasting. The particular strength of PSB comes from its ability to appeal to people from all backgrounds and its ambition to reach and serve everyone in the UK. The VLB made that case very strongly. So did viewers and listeners, including those who spend most of their time online. In fact, a quarter of 16 to 24-year-olds, more than any other age group, told us that they value PSB services which are available to everyone. We saw the importance of that in August, when a transmitter fire led to hundreds of thousands of Freeview viewers losing their signal, including my father. We're reviewing what happened and working with the transmitter owner, Arqiva, to make sure it protects viewers from similar incidents in the future. We felt it again in September, when subtitles, signing and audio description were disrupted on channels 4 and 5. Millions of deaf and hard of hearing, blind or partially sighted people lost out. Ofcom met the broadcasters to demand answers, and now we're examining what action might be required to ensure that they don't find themselves in a similar situation again. TV and radio matter to everybody, so everybody must be able to enjoy them wherever they live, whatever impairments might affect them, and whether or not they're online. Even after a big rise in internet use during the pandemic, 6% of UK homes, more than 1.5 million, choose not to connect. So for all the talk of Fire Sticks and Facebook, let's not forget about Freeview, which is still the biggest TV service in the UK, used by 18 million homes. Freeview, like FM radio, is a proven affordable platform. We expect it to remain a major route into public service channels for millions of viewers for many years to come. When it comes to managing the UK's airwaves, which is a big part of Ofcom's daily work, we expect that PSBs will have access to Freeview spectrum for at least the rest of the decade. Those then are some of the ways that we want to secure PSB for the future. Listening to the needs of viewers and listeners, anticipating and understanding changes in behaviour and technology, preserving the value of the PSBs, the commercial PSBs and the BBC for the present generation as well as the next, and ensuring PSBs reach everyone, not just in the online world, but offline too. So as we put our plans in place, we will keep listening to the VLB, because your opinion, perspective and expertise is at the heart of the broadcasting debate in this country. And we will always work on the evidence, independently, without fear or favour, on behalf of everyone in society. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Maggie. The first of your themes I'd like to pick up on was trust in the regulator and the independence of Ofcom. I should declare an interest, having a decade ago been a senior Ofcom executive for about 2.5 years. I came away very, very impressed with the organisation, and particularly how it handled those moments of tension with the government. And let's be honest, there were moments of tension with the government back then. Why do people like me and VLV members worry about the independence of Ofcom at the moment? Let me give you 3 examples, and you're free to respond to any or none of them. The appointment of the chair of Ofcom. When the person who was clearly the government's front runner fell at the first hurdle, the race was rerun with lower hurdles. The preferred candidate, clearly from the government, then swerved off the course, almost colliding with some innocent civil servants watching. Second point is the Channel 4 board, and I left that board back in May. I, as far as I'm aware from public notices, have not yet been replaced. In fact, there are now 3 unfilled non-executive roles on the Channel 4 board, basically because the government has not accepted Ofcom's recommendations. And there could be a further 2 from the end of next month. We watch with interest. Thirdly, the online safety bill, which allows the Secretary of State to interfere with Ofcom's independence on content matters in 4 principal areas. And that's not my verdict, that's the verdict of the Independent Carnegie Trust, which has studied the bill in detail. So I suppose the bottom line is, as the interim chair of Ofcom, are you more or less worried about Ofcom's independence from government?
Well, I mean, as I said in my speech just now, we do hold Ofcom's independence very dear, and we do work to maintain that independence. I think that on the things that you talk about, first of all, I'd like to say that we do need to work with the government and the DCMS to obtain effective new legislation, for example, and on the online safety bill. I think that all of us are working very constructively, actually, to achieve a very effective bill. And so I am optimistic about that. We've got quite a bit of water to go under the bridge. But, you know, the Ofcom board is working really hard on that, and as our executive, and very effectively, I think. And we're working with DCMS and government to, and they are listening to us. And on the other two processes, I think that, you know, they're ongoing processes, and I think we'll have to wait and see how they turn out.
But you mentioned culture wars, and some people would say that Paul Dacre's application was, in a sense, part of a culture war. He never made any secret of his concerns about Ofcom, and indeed, in his parting shot, was pretty dismissive about your chief executive. So isn't that, you know, aren't you inevitably part of a culture war?
Well, I think, you know, Paul Dacre has now passed on the job of being chair of Ofcom and moved on to another job. And what I do want to say about the chairman's role, having been in it for a year, is that I've really enjoyed it enormously. As you said, Stuart, it's a great institution. It's a great privilege to chair it, and we have enormous strength in that, not just along the board, but Melanie and the senior management team extremely strong. So, you know, it's a great job.
Just one thing I wanted to pick up, and the past year must have been quite difficult for you, Maggie, because you and Melodors have been negotiating with the government on all these issues, and probably more that we don't know about, whilst you have been mentioned as a candidate yourself for the role. So in a sense, you're negotiating with the people who would decide whether you're going to be the next chair. Isn't that a bit awkward?
Well, I mean, it's part of any chairman's role to manage conflicts. I think, you know, the process has been on and off. I've enjoyed quite a bit of time when it's off rather than on. So I think, you know, the main thing about conflicts, you declare anything that might potentially have a conflict. So if I were to put my hat in the ring, then it would be known. And so I think, as far as I'm aware, it hasn't affected any outcome at all.
Right, well, would you like to clarify whether you are a candidate in this particular race that's running now?
I actually haven't made up my mind yet, Stuart.
Okay, thank you. Can I just go back to the online safety bill? Because the Carnegie Trust report quite rightly points out that what we've become used to is government and parliament, and certainly when I was at Ofcom, we talked about responsibility to parliament as much as to government, that they would set out a series of guidelines or requirements of what they wanted in terms of content legislation, and leave the detail of that to Ofcom. People are interpreting this bill as saying, yes, this is overall what we want, but actually we also reserve the right to, if you like, get involved or interfere with Ofcom's day-to-day decision-making. Is that a fair representation? And is it, if it is it something to worry about?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that, you know, we are still talking about these issues, so it's probably not right to make any conclusions at this point. One of the things that I would say about the legislation is it's deliberately actually drawn quite widely, so that we all recognise that we're at the start of a journey, and the UK itself is a world leader. You know, it's right at the cutting edge of doing anything about online. And so there's a general recognition that things have to be drawn fairly widely. And then as time goes along and with secondary legislation and things, that'll enable us to react to the future. So, you know, it is a negotiation, but I think we're definitely getting there.
Okay, one more from me. Thank you for that. And then I'm going to go to the questions from the audience. So please, a reminder, if you've got a question for Maggie, please put it in the Q&A box. My last question at this point is about prominence. Now, just to explain that Ofcom, actually, I think it's almost 7 years Ofcom has been, certainly in my view, rightly banging on about the need for legislation to reform the rules that guarantee appropriate prominence and access to public service content. And for those who wonder what that means, it's basically giving people a choice on the screen of what channels they want to watch, but giving prominence to the PSBs. Now, you never really get a clear reply from government. They've talked about, you know, they're committed to acting on your recommendations, but we also know that the streamers, and Richard Sharp, you know, was very prominent in, I thought, representing the Netflixes of the world as almost a threat to the BBC and to British broadcasters. I mean, do you actually believe the government is going to do anything at the end of the day about this prominence issue?
Well, I think, as you know, we had the small screen, big debate consultation, and prominence was a huge part of what people told us they wanted. And I, you know, personally really believe that prominence is an important issue for PSBs, and I don't like seeing them getting lost online. So it's something that I think the whole of Ofcom would like to see. They've said that in their response to the consultation. And I would also say that there's a media bill, we hope, which is going to be coming up, and that's where prominence will be dealt with. So I'm optimistic at the moment that we will manage something on prominence, and it is important.
Thank you. Now to take questions which are coming up on the Q&A box. Lucy Regan is asking this on behalf of Jill Allen King. My question, why cannot all programs be audio described? Why on the news do they not I think that means, what do they not spell out what the foreign language speakers are saying? And Jill Allen King, she should explain, is totally blind, and this is why Lucy Regan is asking the question on her behalf. So I suppose basically the short version of that is, why are not foreign language speakers audio described?
Well, I think that obviously there are certain rules and basic things that broadcasters have to offer, and one can see that doing foreign languages as well would be quite a difficult thing to do. But I do think that we're always listening to people, and we're always trying to ask our broadcasters to do better. So you know, there's no harm in asking the question further. Okay,
Steve Gettings, who I think used to work at Ofcom, now works, I think, at Digital UK, asking about Freeview, and this is an issue of continuing concern to VLV members, and you mentioned Freeview. He says that, given that Ofcom will soon lead internationally on developing and advocating for the UK's position on the future use of Freeview spectrum, given the importance of Freeview to universal PSB access, what will Ofcom be doing to protect spectrum for Freeview services beyond 2030?
Well,
what can you do beyond 2030?
That's a long way out, isn't it, actually? I mean, I think we've already said that we're going to take to the World Radio Communications Conference in 2023 that we'd like to see Freeview have, you know, unchallenged access to its digital waves, at least to the end of this decade and probably back beyond. I do think, back to my theme of needing to keep pace and needing to watch at that stage, as we get towards that stage, we will need to keep monitoring and see what, you know, how audiences are viewing their programs, how many have moved online. There'll also have to be a significant move on the broadband USO. There'll have to be, it will have to be, you know, readily available to everybody in sufficient speed, and as I say, to everybody. So there's a number of parts that will have to be in place for any change, and we'll just have to wait and see, I think, as we get to 2030 and beyond, what changes need to happen.
Would you accept that there is a body of opinion in Ofcom, which I think is a minority, or has been a minority, which believes that the spectrum used by Freeview is not the most economically efficient use of the spectrum? And those people would normally be amongst the economists who work in an organisation and sometimes within the spectrum department. I'm told you understand spectrum better than most of us. Can you see a time when the government says, make better economic use of that spectrum and shut down Freeview?
I mean, I do actually love spectrum. So I think as an outside broadcaster, it's just really very interesting, but it's also a wonderful way of providing new technology and new means of doing things. And we do have in Ofcom some wonderful engineers who know everything about spectrum and literally spend all their time making sure that we get the best use of our spectrum. And even in my days at chairing SDN, I remember that we started off with a few channels and we were able to divide the spectrum and then get many more. And that's the way it's been working. And we're in a constant process of analysing where the spectrum is best used, because we only have certain amounts of it available. And we take people off spectrum and put people on spectrum. And as you know, we've just had this 5G auction and we've raised 1.4 billion for the government. And we're going towards using very, very high frequencies and looking at what they can do, and that means getting lots and lots of data potentially, but only short distances. So it's a fascinating area, but I must say, as to your argument, Stuart, I've not heard that myself personally.
Okay, I'm going to move on to something very different, but it is it's a very topical issue. It's about diversity, and it comes from Simon Albury, the chair of the Campaign for Broadcasting Equality, also a VLV member. And here's what he's put on. Ofcom has highlighted broadcasters' difficulties in retaining minority ethnic staff, yet Ofcom appears to turn a blind eye to racism. Ofcom has said nothing about racism. Does Ofcom believe racism has played no role in the failure to retain minority ethnic staff? That's the question.
Well, first of all, hello, Simon. I've known Simon for 30 years, so it's nice of him to come on to the programme today. So Ofcom really does care about diversity. I hope Simon does feel that. We've just done a 5-year review on it, and we try as far as we are able to hold the broadcasters to account and to publish their progress. And also the board, I would say, does also hold ourselves to account. We monitor quite closely our diversity. I was only literally looking at it at the last board meeting, and what I can see is that we're actually recruiting ethnically diverse people at a faster rate than any other section, which obviously we need to do to change the dial. So we are doing what we can, you know, I really do think it's important, and
but I suppose what Simon probably getting at, what does the Yorkshire Cricket Club saga tell us? That actually within institutions, actually there is inbuilt racism, which doesn't always come out until suddenly, you know, something like, such as this affair happens. Yeah. And yet, has Ofcom actually ever considered whether there is actual racism going on inside the broadcasting organisations?
Well, I mean, I think that it's for the broadcasters, obviously, to look at themselves, actually. But let me just say something about my own experience, and this is quite an interesting one as well in terms of the Yorkshire Cricket Club, because one of the things I think that you have to do with racism, and possibly racism that you don't actually realise you've got, is you need to talk to people about their lived experiences. And when I was deputy chair, I actually had town halls in Ofcom and was able to talk to people about their experiences. And what you find is that when they start to talk about them, and when people listen, people understand, and then they adjust their behaviour. And so what I do feel over the last few years is that the ethnic minorities are finding a voice, and people are listening, and I think they want to change, and I hope they want to change. I think that all the signs are that people want to change, and that's really important. So I think it's about listening and taking things into account, and then changing your behaviour.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to try and squeeze in 2 more questions before our time's up. One, I think on behalf of Carol Tung, Chair of UK Coalition for Cultural Diversity, should SVOD streaming platforms, I guess that's a reference to people like Netflix and Amazon, be mandated to carry at least 30% British content and to invest a proportion of their revenues in UK drama, film and significant documentary? What's the answer to that? Well,
they're not regulated by Ofcom. So
should they be?
I think there's a move, isn't there, to move people like Netflix onto the same sort of or similar regulation to, and that will come in the media bill if it comes. So, I mean, I do think that we're willing to listen to all ideas about things, but a lot of what is produced, as I've mentioned in my speech, a lot of what is produced by the streamers, it needs for their own business plan to actually work right across the world, and so and it is at the end of the day their choice as to what they put on. But it's an interesting idea.
And the final one I'm going to have time for, this is from Michael Wilson, going back to the online safety bill. He asks, does the online safety bill go far enough? The public is being signposted to expect the internet being, quotes, cleaned up, when in reality, that's not what the bill will deliver. Isn't Ofcom being handed a poisoned chalice?
Well, thank you for that question. I mean, we do need to set expectations. We're not going to be able to manage everything, and that's just the nature of the beast. I always say it's a little bit like whack-a-mole, where with the broadcasting code you can sort of whack every mole, but with online there are far too many moles to whack. What I do think we're going to do is to make a big difference, and we're going to measure that. So, I am hopeful that we'll be able to make a big difference, but we're not going to be able to wipe everything that's, that's illegal, or, for example, or harmful off the internet.
Maggie, we've run out of time. Thank you very much indeed for your speech and for answering all these questions. You said earlier on, I think, that this might be your last appearance as the interim chair, or who knows, you might still be the interim chair in a year's time, given the process so far. But from everyone on VLV today, thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stuart.